Hello guys, this is CannibalChess, and today we're going to be analyzing a game from last year, February, for the Meltwater Champions Chess Tour, and playing are Daniel Dubov and Magnus Carlsen, and it's a pretty interesting game, so I hope y'all enjoy it. But it starts with Magnus playing e4, Dubov goes e5, Magnus goes knight f3, Dubov plays knight c6, and here Magnus decides to play the Italian opening, and this just means that he's going to play bishop to c4. And here Dubov just continues by bringing his other knight out to f6. This is just, well, it's obviously to get his knight out, but it's also threatening this e4 pawn, so here Magnus just continues by creating this pawn chain, protecting this e4 pawn, and also what this does is it makes it to where his dark square bishop can come out now to d2 or e3 or even g5. And seeing that Magnus's dark square bishop can come out now, Dubov decides to make it to where it cannot put a pin on his knight. So he pushes h6, so now Magnus does no longer have g5 because then Dubov would just simply capture the bishop and he'd be up a piece. So instead of moving the bishop out right away, Magnus decides to bring his other knight to c3, and seeing that Dubov can now create a pin, he indeed does. And there are several things that Magnus could do here. He could push a3, asking Dubov, do you want to take the knight, or do you want to move back to a5 and then I will push you again and then you will move back to b6? Or you could just simply take the knight and I don't mind doubled c pawns. Or he could also just simply castle, and what Magnus decides to do here is to just continue development by castling. And Dubov does indeed take the opportunity of doubling Magnus's c pawns, which Magnus doesn't mind because he sees this as, well, now your knight can no longer go to b4, it can't access d4 either, and also at some point I'm going to want to push d4, and now I have pawns to help me do that. So Magnus is fine with his doubled c pawns, and Dubov here continues by castling as well. And after Dubov castles, then Magnus finds this interesting move, and he decides to move his light square bishop back to b3. And the reason why he does this is because he notices that Dubov has yet to activate his light square bishop, and the way people usually do this is by opening up the pawn on the d file to make room for the light square bishop to come out maybe to g4 or something like that. So he's seeing that Dubov in the future will probably play d5, and he doesn't want his bishop to be attacked while also having it to where Dubov can get his light square bishop out to create a pin. So he just simply tucks his light square bishop away on b3, and Dubov then does indeed play d5, just striking the center, also making it to where his light square bishop can come out now to g4 or even to e6. And the computer here is saying that playing a5 would have been better, just pushing for a4. This would kind of force Magnus to play a4 because you don't want Dubov to play a4. Because if he did, if Magnus plays something like h3 here, it's a decent move. It would just make it to where Dubov couldn't get his knight here or his light square bishop here at any point in the game. Then Dubov would have this move a4, and what this does is it would push Magnus's light square bishop back out to c4, and then Dubov could play d5, which would result in Magnus's bishop being attacked while also making it where his light square bishop can come out. So Dubov would be a little bit better here in this position, which is what the computer was seeing here by playing a5. But it's fine that Dubov doesn't play it. He plays d5, and this is a very good move as well, because now you can get your light square bishop out, you can complete development. So it's a fine move as well. And here Magnus takes the pawn on d5, because if you don't take the pawn and you decide to play something like h3, something like that, it's a blunder, because then Dubov would be able to take Magnus's e-pawn, Magnus would take back, and then Dubov would be able to pick up a free pawn at the end of the trade, so he'd be up a pawn. And Magnus, of course, does not want that to be the case, so instead he takes the pawn. Dubov takes back with the knight, And here, taking the knight would also be a mistake, because if you take the knight, then Dubov could take back with the queen, and this would in turn activate Dubov's queen. So it would just get it off the 8th rank. It would make it a little bit more active in the game, and here Dubov would actually be in control of the center of the board, because there's all these pieces. There's the knight, the pawn, and the queen. They're all defending the center of the board here, so his position would be a little bit more active. And so, seeing that, Magnus does not capture the knight. Instead, he pushes h3. And this is just to keep Dubov from pinning his knight to Magnus's queen. The computer here is saying that something like rook e1 would have been better, going after the only central pawn that Dubov has. You would have two attackers on it for Dubov's one, so then Dubov would have to move something like e8 himself. And then it would be a little bit better for Magnus, but as he played it, he played h3. And here, Dubov finds this interesting move, and it should be obvious because there's only one hanging piece on Magnus's side, and it comes with a threat as well. So Dubov sees this as an opportunity to gain an advantage, and he does indeed take it. So he takes the pawn on c3, and what this does is this threatens Magnus's queen here. So the queen's got to move. She can move to d2, or she could move to e1 as well. And the computer says that d2 is a little bit better. I think they're almost pretty much the same. Just this one's minor in the amount it's better. There's some obviously crazy lines later on or something like that that make it just slightly better, but I'm not going to go into that. The point is that Magnus plays e1 instead of d2, and this gives Dubov the opportunity to find this brilliant idea of bringing his other knight into the game as well by pushing it to d4. And there's a few reasons why this is a brilliant move. For one, now Dubov has two knights in Magnus's space, and also both knights cannot be captured, because if Magnus goes after this knight, say if he captures it with his queen, then this is a blunder, because now Dubov has this amazing fork on the king and the queen. And so after Magnus moves his king, then Dubov will just pick up the queen and basically be winning the game. So that knight cannot be taken because of what I just showed y'all. And this knight should not be taken. It can be taken, but it just shouldn't be, because if Magnus takes that knight, then Dubov can just take back with the pawn, and now there is this outpost for the knight, where the knight is basically stuck on that square, and it is defending, or basically attacking, all of these squares on the queen side. So that'd be very bad for Magnus as well. So he does not take either knight, and what he actually does instead is he takes this pawn that's hanging. So he takes Dubov's only centralized pawn, and here Dubov continues the attack by bringing his knight to e2, just checking the king, and here Magnus has two options. He can move h1 or he can move h2. And for me, obviously, or what I would think, the logical move would be to move h1, because if you move h2, then Dubov has this idea of maybe going here and then pinning the knight to the king, and that it kind of looks a little bad. And I think Magnus saw that as well. So what he plays here is he plays king h1 instead. And this is a little bit of a mistake, not too much, doesn't really blunder too much material or anything. It's just it's not the best move here. And Dubov finds another brilliant move in this position where he can sacrifice his bishop and take the pawn on h3. And so Magnus retakes, obviously, and now there's this open g-file. There's also this long open diagonal that Dubov could now access with his queen if he wants to. So there's a lot of attacking chances for Dubov now. That's why the computer's saying that he's better here. It's not because he has more pieces, it's just because his attacking chances are better than Magnus's. His chance of checkmating is better. So he continues with the best move. He takes Magnus's bishop on b3. Magnus takes his knight on e2, and There's a reason why Magnus didn't take the knight on b3. It's because if Magnus were to take this knight, then Dubov has this queen d5 move, and what this does is this would check the king while it also attacks Magnus's knight. So after the king moves to h2, then Dubov would just simply pick up the knight for free, and then he would basically have won back the material and be winning the game, basically, because his pawns aren't all messed up like Magnus's are, and his pieces are very much more active. So he would basically be winning the game at that point, which is why Magnus did not take the knight on b3. He instead took the knight on e2, which is correct, but Dubov still is able to play this d5 move. He doesn't get the knight right away, but it's still a good idea to activate your queen and then also connect your rooks in the back rank. So that's what Dubov does. After Magnus moves at h2, then Dubov decides to take the rook on a1. And the computer has an interesting idea here that Dubov, I mean, maybe he didn't take as much time in this position. I don't know what the game looked like, how fast they were playing or anything. I think this was a rapid match, but here there's a better idea than just trying to win back material by taking the rook, because this knight here is very much more valuable than this rook, because this rook's not doing anything. This knight is very active on the queen side. It could also potentially be active on the king side as well if you get it over here to d4. And this is what the computer is suggesting here. The computer is suggesting that Dubov play d4, because what this does is this attacks Magnus's queen, so it forces his queen to move while also still defending this knight. And there are four moves here that the queen could do. She could go to e1, she could go to e3, e4, or she could go to h5 to defend the knight. And any of these moves, I'll just show you the best one for Magnus here. If Dubov were to play this move, it would have been to play e4. And here, Dubov would have just simply taken the knight, which is a brilliant move. And Magnus would have basically had to have taken the Dubov's queen because he's checking the king. So either way, Dubov's gonna take Magnus's queen next move. So Magnus would have gone ahead and traded queens, and here Dubov has a fork. And so after Magnus moves, then Dubov would pick up the queen, and he would win back the material this way as well. So it would be another chance of him winning back material if he had played the best move, which would have been to move the knight from b3 to d4. And also his pawns are much better here. They're not all scattered, so it would be a winning endgame for Dubov here. If he were to only have found this amazing knight d4 move, which it's fine that he doesn't. He has other opportunities in the game to draw or even, I think, win once or twice, but we'll get into that in a few minutes. So after that, and he takes the rook, then Magnus decides to activate his dark square bishop by putting it on the longest diagonal in the game, and also threatening to pick up the knight that just took Magnus's other rook. So it's kind of odd to me that this is a mistake. It's not on like the top 3 best moves for Magnus here. It kind of seems like a logical move, but the computer is suggesting that g1 is better, directly threatening this pawn. Also, Magnus could have potential ideas of going f4 and then putting his queen on g4 and going after Dubov's king at this point, I believe is what the computer is seeing. Should be strong ideas for him, but he doesn't. He just goes ahead and activates his dark square bishop, threatens Dubov's knight, and Dubov responds to this by bringing his rook into the game. And what this move does is it pins Magnus's knight to his queen. So it seems like a logical move here. I was looking at the line, seeing how this was a missed win earlier, and both moves, if you move the rook here or if you move the rook here, they're both very tough positions to play. I believe both of them probably end in a draw if you play it correctly. Maybe this one's just slightly better. but both of them are very hard to play. The lines are super long, so I'm not going to get into them as well, but just know that this move by Dubov was just to pin the knight to the queen. And here Magnus finally finds the move that the computer was suggesting earlier, rook g1, just going after this pawn, creating an attack on Dubov's king side. And here Dubov he plays a move that would make sense. I mean, you're just trying to kick away this knight so you can get at the queen. The knight basically can't move, because if the knight moves, then you pick up the queen. So it makes sense to go after the knight. You want to get free pieces, but the computer's suggesting something like queen here would have been better to create two pins, where creating a pin on the king and a pin on the queen at the same time. So it would be very deadly at this point. It'd be a very hard position for Magnus to play. But Dubov doesn't see that. He wants to try and win material as fast as possible. So he just goes directly after the knight. And Magnus finds a good move here. It's one of the best moves in the position. And he just simply moves his queen to g4. And what this does is it makes it to where Dubov cannot capture this knight. If Dubov were to capture the knight, then Magnus would have mate in 1, and he would just basically win the game very easily. So Dubov, seeing that he cannot capture the knight here, decides to play the best move, and that's just defending against checkmate. He just moves g5. And although this move is the best move in the position for Dubov, it's a very weakening move as well, because it makes it to where Magnus's queen can now access these squares to get to Dubov's king. And that's why the computer's saying it's kind of a drawing position here, because now Magnus has this brilliant move of moving queen to f5. And it would actually be a mistake here. It would actually be, the game would basically be blundered if Dubov were to just take this knight thinking, well, I mean, I just can take a knight for free, and that would also make it to where I'm attacking Magnus's queen. That would actually blunder the game in, like, I think it's mate in 4 or 5. If you take the knight here, then yes, it's mate in 4. The queen can check the king. After the king moves to the only square possible, which is h8, you check the king again, queen h6, and once the king moves back, you bring the rook up to g5, checking the king again, and after it moves to the only square, then you have this checkmate. It's a very interesting looking checkmate, but that would have been very easy for Magnus to see if Dubov had taken the knight. So it's a good thing that he did not take the knight. That would have been a big mistake to take the knight. And so here, instead of taking, he does a different move that it's not as bad as taking with the pawn, but it's still not very good either. And the computer here is saying, instead of taking the knight with the pawn, you should have just taken the knight with the rook, because this is actually a safe move for Dubov here. Now, it does seem like it's kind of weird, because you're still letting Magnus potentially take this knight, and you're also making it to where he can get this rook with the bishop. But if he takes the rook with his bishop, then this is actually completely winning for Dubov, because after retaking with the queen and basically forcing a queen trade, because if you don't take Dubov's queen, then he's going to take your queen next move and just have a free queen. So you basically have to take his queen. And then after he retakes, and even if you take his knight here, which is the best move for Magnus, or it would be, then it's completely winning for Dubov, because then he has this rook takes f2 move, and then after Magnus moves, and he can also pick up this other pawn. And at this point, Magnus's position is just awful. His pawns are scattered everywhere. He has like 3 pawn islands, and I mean Dubov does too, but he has more pawns and they're all connected. So it'd be a totally winning position here for Dubov if Magnus had taken his rook with his bishop. So also in this position, the taking the the knight here would also have been a blunder, because yes, then Dubov could just pick up the queen for free as well. So I think the only thing in here that would make this position a draw is checking here, and basically what you would do is you would just simply just repeat these moves over and over again, and then you would just draw by repetition. So that would be the best scenario for Dubov in this position. As you can see, that's what that was the engine's calling that the best move. So the best situation for Dubov right now is to draw the position if he plays correctly, but he does not. He decides to go rook e7, and I believe what he's trying to do here is he's trying to cut off the queen from ever getting to g7 and checkmating the king, but Magnus doesn't really need g7 to checkmate here. And what he decides to do is he moves, because Dubov did not take one of his main attacking pieces, he uses his knight now to get into Dubov's position a little bit more. And this is a very crazy position because it looks like you're hanging your queen. It looks like you're only going after the rook. You're just giving your queen away, but it's actually not, because if Dubov were to take Magnus's queen here, then that would be completely winning for Magnus, because after Magnus takes the rook, it would be a fork. After Dubov moves his king, then Magnus would pick up his queen, and he would be totally winning in this position. So, seeing that, Dubov does not take Magnus's queen. He instead plays the best move and just simply checks Magnus's king here, and also gets his queen away from Magnus's queen. So Magnus can no longer take his queen if he were to go here and then check. So that's the main idea of this move, just getting the queen out of the way of Magnus's, and then also to check his opponent. So here Magnus just moves the rook up, which is a very good move. It's keeping the rook on this active file and also defending against check at the same time. And here Dubov decides to try and get his knight into the game again and make it to where it's not going to get taken. But the computer here is suggesting that this move is actually it's one of the only chances left for Dubov to try and draw here, because if Magnus plays completely correctly and if Dubov plays completely accurately in the end game here, then I believe Magnus would win. But if Magnus makes a few little inaccuracies here and there, then Dubov still has a chance to win, because after this move, rook e1, the best move for Magnus would be to take the rook. After Dubov retakes with the king, then best move for Magnus would be to take this pawn, kind of creating a threat discovered attack here. And then the best move for Dubov would be to try and trade queens, which Magnus would obviously be reluctant to do because he has such a good position, so he would try and keep his queen. Dubov would just ask again, do you want to trade queens? And they could potentially continue this and draw by repetition, or Magnus could take Dubov's queen, and then this position would be reached where it's basically a draw. It's a little bit better for Magnus, though, because his pieces are just more active, and Dubov's pawns kind of look like his now, where they're kind of all over the place. So if played exactly correctly, then maybe Dubov still had a chance of drawing this game, but he does not play that. He tries to get his knight back into the game by c2, and here Magnus finds the best move and just takes the rook. And the reason why this would be a bad idea to play is because now you have this same structure here, but it's a little bit different because, well, one of the moves that you could try is you could try this move, but this would blunder mate into after queen here, and then after you try and defend with your queen, then this is basically just checkmate. So that's one move you could try. The better move, the computer is saying, is here, And after you move the king, it's the same move. It's not checkmate right away though. After king f7, and then the bishop can take the rook, and then you just retake with the king. And you're not completely lost here, but it's pretty dangerous position for Dubov at this point. So that's another variation that could potentially happen here if Dubov were to take the knight. Instead, he does a move that's worse. It's a little bit worse than taking the knight. The knight would have been a better move, and the best move would have been to move your knight here. And the reason why this is the best move is it attacks Magnus's king. It kind of forces it back. I mean, the best moves is to play c8, and then you just move your king up to g7 or something like that just to defend. And then the computer's saying something like f takes e3 here, just picking up more material, and it's still a better position for Magnus. So every variation at this point is either a draw if played incorrectly, or basically a win for Magnus if played correctly. So that's the last. I think that's the last variation I'm going to go into. But instead of playing this move, Dubov continues by trying to get his knight up to the king side. He moves knight to d4, which it kind of is a logical looking move as well. The difference here is just that this is just, it's slightly a little bit more accurate, just barely. But either one's kind of losing at this point, because after bishop takes d4, you're just kind of lost. And Dubov tries to defend by retaking, but then Magnus finds this move. He just moves his knight to e6, and here, even if Dubov had played the best move, the computer suggesting d7, it's still pretty much a lost position after this, because if you try and defend this by bringing the rook over, then you can just simply trade down a material here, and after queen takes and then king takes, then basically Magnus is winning, because he has a whole entire rook to maneuver around the board, and he would just pick up the pawns very easily. So that's even if Dubov would have played the best move in this position. His last hope for drawing this game was right here, when he should have played e3 instead of knight d4. So and even here he does not play the best move. He plays queen to e5, and there's actually a mate in 8 here that Magnus saw, and it starts with queen g6. And so Dubov plays the only move possible. He plays, well, it's not the only move. He could have defended here, but that would have been checkmate. So he plays the best move, which is king to h8. Magnus goes queen to h6. Dubov goes back. And the only reason why Magnus did this in the first place was just to get rid of the pawn here. So Dubov goes back to g8. Magnus here brings his queen up to f8, and here actually Dubov resigns the game, because he sees that there's going to be a checkmate in 5 moves, so there's really no point continuing. But I'm just going to show y'all the rest of the checkmate. So after Magnus moves here, then he would have no choice but to move to h7. Then Magnus would pick up the rook, also delivering checkmate. And Dubov would have to move here. Basically, it's the best move. And after he moves there would be another check, knight f8. He would move down here. After check again, then Dubov would have to defend with the queen, and then here would just be checkmate. So that's what Magnus saw. It kind of seems like it's a pretty hard thing to see, I would think. It's like an 8-move checkmate from like right here. But Magnus is one of the best in the world, so it makes sense. And that was the entire game. I hope y'all enjoyed this video. I hope y'all learned quite a bit of new things from it, and I hope you'll have a great day. Thanks.